Test every teacher, including Paul. Once you establish that God has a fixed standard, revealed, precise, and unchanging, then everything that comes after must be tested against it, not assumed, not inherited, not accepted because of popularity or tradition. Tested. That's not optional. That's commanded. If a prophet arises and gives you a sign or wonder, you shall not listen, if it leads you away from what was already established. Deuteronomy 13. That means the standard was never signs, never influence, never authority claims. The standard has always been alignment. So when it comes to someone like Paul, the question is not emotional and it's not personal. It's simple. What verifies him, and does he pass the test? Because when you actually examine the record, the verification is not what people assume it is. Paul claims visions. He claims authority. He claims that he performed signs and wonders. But in his own words, there are no detailed accounts, no named witnesses, no specific events laid out clearly for examination, just general statements, signs, wonders, mighty works. The actual detailed miracle stories people rely on come from Acts, a narrative written about him, not by him. That distinction matters, because now you're no longer dealing with first-hand testimony, you're dealing with a secondary account. Compare that to the prophets people claim he stands alongside. Moses didn't just say he did mighty works, he confronted an empire, and an entire nation witnessed it. Elijah didn't claim power in general terms. He called down fire in front of a crowd, and the people fell on their faces. Elisha's works were specific, repeated, and observable across different situations and groups. These weren't small, localized events passed through a single narrative voice. These were defining, public, undeniable acts that shaped the identity of the people themselves. So already, you see a difference in scale, a difference in verification, and a difference in how the record is presented. That alone should slow people down. But most don't even stop there. They move straight to acceptance because they've been taught to treat Paul as unquestionable. But Scripture never gave anyone that exemption. Because the real test isn't what someone claims to have done. The real test is, what are they teaching? And does it align with what God already revealed? And this is where things become serious, because the foundation is clear. The Most High is one. There is none beside him. He does not change. Worship belongs to him alone. That's not vague. That's repeated, reinforced, and protected throughout the text. So when you see teachings that introduce a new center of authority, elevate another figure into a cosmic mediating role, and in practice, shift how people approach God, you don't excuse it, you test it. People will say, it's not a replacement, it's an explanation. But that's not how the test works. The test is not based on intent, it's based on outcome. What does it produce? If the result is people praying to another, invoking another, dividing attention in worship, then that is not a small clarification. That is a functional shift. And if God already said, "There is none beside me," Isaiah 44:6, then anything that introduces another focal point, no matter how it's explained, has to be questioned. That's not rebellion. That's obedience to the standard. Now, does that automatically prove Paul was false? No, that's not the claim. The claim is more disciplined than that. He has not been clearly verified by the standard that Scripture itself requires. And if that's the case, then blind acceptance is not faith, it's negligence. Because the same Scripture people quote to defend him is the one that warned them, test everything, hold fast to what is good. Not what is easy, not what is popular, not what is inherited, what is aligned. And if alignment is defined by what God already revealed, then that is the only place your judgment can stand.
Everything else, every vision, every doctrine, every teacher, must either match that or be rejected. That's the test. And most people don't take it, not because they can't, but because it requires them to question what they were handed instead of just accepting it. But truth doesn't bend to comfort. It stands.
Now let's bring it directly to the point people avoid. Worship. Not honor. Not respect. Not acknowledgement. Worship. Because that's where the line actually is. Worship / Yeshua versus Father. Do we worship the Father alone? Who did Yeshua say to worship? Should we honor the Son and worship the Father? From the Torah forward, the standard is not unclear. It is repeated, reinforced, and protected. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. I am the first and I am the last. Besides me there is no God. Exodus 23, Matthew 4:10, Isaiah 44:6. That is not symbolic language. That is a boundary. And if you cross that boundary, it doesn't matter how you explain it. You are no longer operating within what was revealed. So now the question becomes, who taught people to direct worship toward Yeshua? Because when you actually go back and look at what Yeshua himself said, the pattern doesn't shift the way people assume it does. He says, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone." Mark 10:18. He says, "The Father is greater than I." John 14:28. He says, "My teaching is not mine, but his who sent me." John 7:16. And when it comes to worship, he doesn't redirect it to himself. He reinforces the original command. You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. Matthew 4:10. Not me also. Not me now. Him only. And even in how he teaches people to pray, he says, Our Father who is in heaven. Matthew 6:9. Not, pray to me. Not, come through me as an intermediary in your address. He maintains the same structure that existed before him. So now you have to ask the honest question. If Yeshua did not redirect worship to himself, who did? Because the shift people live by today, the one where people pray directly to Jesus, people center worship on him, people treat him as the primary point of access, that shift is not clearly commanded by him in the way the Torah commands worship of the Father. And this is where the difference between honor and worship becomes critical. Because yes, you can honor the Messiah, respect his role, acknowledge what he did. But none of that automatically means he becomes the object of worship. The prophets did great works. Moses parted the sea. Elijah called down fire. Elisha raised the dead. But no one prayed to them, worshiped them, invoked them as intermediaries. Because the structure was always, greater than God acts through people, not replaces himself with them. So if nothing about God changes, and Scripture says he does not change, Malachi 3:6, then the structure of worship does not change either. That means worship remains with the Father, not divided, not shared, not expanded. And this is where people start introducing language to justify the shift. He's part of God. He's within God. He shares in God's identity. But if that were the case in a way that required separate worship, then it would not be treated as something hidden, implied, or later explained. It would have been stated clearly when God defined himself, and he didn't. Instead, he said, "There is none beside me." So now the test becomes very simple. Does directing worship to Yeshua preserve that statement, or does it complicate it? Because if it introduces a second focal point, a second name invoked in worship, a second figure addressed in prayer, then no matter how it's explained philosophically, it has already crossed the boundary functionally. And that's what people don't want to admit. They want to say, we're still worshiping the same God, while simultaneously praying to another, calling on another, centering devotion on another. That's not just language, that's practice. And Scripture never tells you to ignore practice. It tells you, test everything, hold fast to what is good. So if you are actually testing, honestly, without bias, you have to ask, did Yeshua ever command worship to be directed to himself, or did he consistently direct it to the Father? And if the answer is the Father, then the structure remains. Worship the Most High alone. Honor the Messiah if you believe in him. Respect his role, but do not cross the line that God himself established. Because once you move that line, even slightly, you are no longer preserving what was revealed. You are redefining it. And that is exactly what you were warned not to do.